At the beginning of this work, I first want to thank Mr. Dragoslav Simic, the author, radio journalist, and historian, and Mr. Dragomir Pokrajac, a radio enthusiast from Serbia employed in the United States, who provided me with a significant amount of archival material and sound recordings in their possession. I conducted an interview and exchanged emails with both as a part of preparation for this work. Also, I would like to thank Mr. George Brkic from the Music Archive of Radio Belgrade. As I was finishing this paper, he drew my attention to specific Schlager compositions that have survived turbulent times and the historical bombing of the building, so I can say with relative certainty that those compositions were broadcast during the 1930s. On December 1st, 1918, in Belgrade, the Serbian Prince Regent Alexander I Karađorđević proclaimed the common state for all South Slavs. Initially named the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, the state was officially renamed Yugoslavia in 1929, which was the name that is celebrated in the halls of modern history. The same year Yugoslavia got its name, a significant chapter in its and Serbia's media history was written on the fifth floor of today's building of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts in Knez Mihailova Street in Belgrade. The regular broadcast of Radio Belgrade began. Whether Radio Belgrade was also the first electronic media in Yugoslavia is a matter of debate. In March 1924, the station started experimental one-hour programming daily through a transmitter in the Belgrade suburb of Rakovica. However, according to Dragoslav Simic, this experimental program lasted only half a day, and the radio was broadcast only sporadically from Belgrade in the following years. In May 1926, Radio Zagreb began regular programming, and various sources testify that they were the first electronic media in southeastern Europe. The emergence of Radio Belgrade from the experimental phase in March 1929 coincided with the establishment of the so-called January dictatorship, when King Alexander I Karađorđević carried out the coup d'etat, abolishing the constitution and parliament due to the rising interethnic tensions between Serbs and Croats. The new king's policy was, in fact, very similar to specific solutions from the communist period that would be adopted decades later. It entailed maximum suppression of national freedoms, insistence on the equality of the three then constituent peoples, meaning Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, and of course, media control. The state obviously wanted to have control over Radio Belgrade, as evidenced by the fact that its long-term director was a high-ranking officer of the Yugoslav Royal Army, Colonel and later General Danilo Kalafatović. The cultural life of the kingdom inherited significant heterogeneity from previous eras. Slovenia, Croatia, the province of Vojvodina in present-day Serbia, and for a couple of decades also Bosnia and Herzegovina were part of Austro-Hungarian Empire until 1918, and as a province of Vienna, albeit distant, were still considered part of the Habsburg cultural sphere. Italy had a strong influence on the coastal regions of Croatia, meaning Istria and Dalmatia. However, the rest of the country, meaning Serbia with Kosovo and the Vardar Valley, present-day North Macedonia, Montenegro and a significant part of Bosnia, was still marked by a strong post-Ottoman cultural model, as the Turkish Empire had controlled the region for almost half a millennium. All these differences were reflected in musical life. While classical music had played a significant role in Croatia and Slovenia for centuries, it was only beginning in Serbia. On the other hand, even thanks to the Turks, who did not allow the development of high culture among the enslaved Raya, Serbia had a very pronounced folkloric heritage, which was highly heterogeneous across various regions. However, by the end of the 19th century, a new genre emerged through the inevitable westernization of the barely independent state. That genre was later called Starogradska muzika, literary old town music. It was folk music adapted to modern ensembles, suitable for performing in small salons and cafes, and it contained tonal harmony. It's worth noting that Starogradska often did not have written or notated arrangements but was passed on orally or simply by listening. This is also its most significant difference from stylized folk music, which professional composers and ethnomusicologists arranged. Until after World War II, Starogradska would constitute the basis of the Serbian urban musical tradition. After the Great War, Starogradska and folk music remained popular, but Belgrade was not immune to global trends. Already in the 1920s, the first Charleston record releases reached private collections. The popular belief, also present in some contemporary movies or series, is that by the 1930s, jazz clubs became a standard part of the rich nightscape of the Yugoslav capital. However, during an interview, Pokrajac said that the role of jazz in pre-war Belgrade was overrated and that popular genres that were not originally Serbian or Yugoslav were performed by the same ensembles who dealt with local folk music. Misha Blam, a well-known Belgrade jazz musician, holds a similar view in his book Jazz in Serbia between 1927 and 1944. And states that the actual expansion of this genre only came during the German occupation in the World War II. The music editor of Radio Belgrade from 1929 to 1937 was Petar Krstić, a composer of an older generation. According to musicologist Ivana Vesic, although Krstić tried to organize the program, he was under constant pressure from General Kalafatović. As a result, the program included shows with Starogradska muzika, such as Serbian Evening or Skadarlija Evening. Skadarlija Evening is named after a Bohemian quarter in Belgrade, which featured live performances of tavern groups that played folk and urban music without any predefined concept, just to please the audience. Because of his resistance to Kalafatović, in 1937, Krstić was replaced by a group of young composers, mainly those educated at the Prague Conservatory, somewhat surprisingly, primarily of left-wing convictions. The position of chief music editor went to Mihailo Vukdragović, and his deputy became Vojislav Vučković. The pressure expressed by the professional community at that time bore fruit, and Vukdragović and Vučković were given somewhat more leeway. For example, Vučković organized shows with avant-garde and atonal music and lectures on the subject. At the same time, Vukdragović appointed another Prague student, a future influential professor of composition at the Music Academy in Belgrade, Stanoilo Rajičić, as the head of the Folk Music Commission. The pressure from the public prevented the cancellation of the above-mentioned shows. Still, the chaotic airing of Starogradska and folk music partially gave way to professional arrangements of folk material by composers such as Stevan Stojanović Mokranjac, Kornelije Stanković, Josif Marinković, and others. A significant part of the archival materials was made available to me by Mr. Simić and Pokrajac. In terms of preserved materials related to the subjects of the research, sources available to us include, first, periodicals including daily newspapers and the magazine of the Radio Belgrade itself. Second, just a few sound recordings, mainly not created in studio conditions. Periodicals are a valuable historical source through which we can confirm the radio's programming concept and the problems that arose from it. Concerning the recordings from the interwar period, two significant problems should be noted. A. There was no professional sound recording equipment in Belgrade before World War II, and B. Even the existing recordings are often lost due to war operations and neglect. It is worth noting that thanks to its collaboration with the Edison Bell Penkala company, which had its representative production office in the present-day capital of Croatia, Radio Zagreb had the conditions for sound recordings, and as a result, a lot of musical and dramatic material, not only Croatian but also Serbian, was preserved. Some musicians also went on world tours among diaspora, and their performances were recorded, for example, in North America. Therefore, most of the musical numbers broadcast on Radio Belgrade were performed live in the studio and did not leave any sound recordings. Therefore, we can talk about the several recordings of folk and Starogradska music that have survived. In that respect, a decisive event was the engagement of brother and sister Sima Begović and Lela Đorđević. While Begović, the son of Tešimir Begović, a tenor of the Belgrade Opera and manager of the National Theatre, occasionally performed on the radio from the start of regular programming, his sister joined him around 1935. After that, they performed as a duo for many years. Both were vocalists and guitar players. The band was expanded in August of the same year with 2 violins. In December 1937, Begović received permission from Vuk Dragović to form a professional folk orchestra of Radio Belgrade. What is certain is that besides Begović, one of the orchestra leaders was also the first violinist, Vlastimir Pavlovich Carevac, a lawyer by profession. Still, as a tavern musician, he was considered a virtuoso and a star. Now let us hear an example from that program, featuring duo Sima Begović and Lela Đorđević. No live recordings have been preserved of the Schlager or popular music that has nothing to do with Serbian or Yugoslav folklore. In that sense, we can only speak of a strong and well-founded assumption about what was broadcast and what could have been broadcast. Based on record productions and testimonies in the press, it is clear that so-called Schlager music featured in the programming concept of Radio Belgrade and other genres such as tango. There is no surviving trace of jazz music being performed on Radio Belgrade. For the next recording, which is also available on YouTube, there are certain indications that it could have been broadcast on Radio Belgrade in the 1930s, although it is recorded in 1920s. Specifically, thanks to Mr. Brkić from the Tonal Archive of Radio Belgrade, it can be established that this song was preserved after World War II in the phonographic archive. Therefore, there is an excellent possibility that it was broadcast during the 1930s. On a side note, Milan Timotić was one of the biggest singing stars of interwar Belgrade. An operatic tenor, he used to record for the Odeon label in the 1920s. He is best known for his episodic role in an unfinished musical film from the early 1940s, Priča jednog dana, in English, The Story of a Day. From that movie, his performance of the song Svi vi što maštate o sreći, English, All of You Who Dream of Happiness, was used in the famous 1982 comedy Maratonci trče počasni krug, in English, The Marathon Family. Let's hear it. A significant milestone occurred in 1936 as Radio Belgrade launched a new service, a shortwave radio station. In the standard history of electronic media, which includes radio, television, and the internet, the significance of shortwave radio stations is often overlooked. However, this type of medium played a significant role until the end of the Cold War. Due to the specific physical characteristics of shortwaves, these stations had a powerful reach and could be heard in remote parts of the planet, thus representing a kind of internet of their time. The shortwave radio station in Belgrade was launched from a separate studio in the current building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Kneza Miloš Street, which at the time served as the headquarters of the Ministry of Forestry. The program, including news and collage programs in different languages and a rich music program, was broadcasted daily. Interestingly, the shows were announced or signed off in 3 different languages: Serbian, French, and German. Twice a month, thanks to the Dutch network of transmitters, in the night hours, 2 one-hour transoceanic shows were broadcasted aimed respectively at the diaspora in North and South America. The first was broadcasted on March 14, 1937, and opened with a greeting from then Prime Minister Milan Stojadinović to Yugoslav emigrants. Though I don't have more precise information, according to the news archive, it is known that the broadcasting of shows to Australia and New Zealand started somewhat later. To some extent, the musical concept of shortwave radio was somewhat similar to the National Radio Belgrade, with an additional emphasis on folk music, probably to preserve national feelings among members of Serbian and Yugoslav diaspora. In this sense, the Sima Begović Orchestra played a significant role and often featured on the airwaves of the station. The following recording was taken with the equipment of the NBC radio network. NBC transmitters were used to amplify incoming shortwave signals in North America. Now please note also the announcement of the station before the song starts.
Ovdje Kaskarak na radio stanica YUA u Beogradu. Nastavljamo vokalni koncert gospođe Rene Đorđević i gospodina Tine Begovića. Posle pauze po 2 minute.
In this sense, it is fascinating to mention certain Serbian diaspora reactions. Therefore, here is a letter originally in Serbian sent by a certain Božidar Igić residing in Akron, Ohio, United States. He states, among other things, quote, "Your broadcasting is of great interest to me as I also sing and play on the radio stations Srpske melodije in English Serbian tunes, and every week at the owner's luxury cafe and director of Serbian tunes, Mr. Sima Stanković in Cleveland, Ohio. As much as I express my warm congratulations to the program managers, so I do too to my, as you call them, popular colleagues. both men and women, and they truly deserve that name and award. For the songs they sang, Anjo Moja Anjo and Anđa na Brodu, if I'm not mistaken, I would like to ask you to send me the lyrics or sheet music. End of quote. Towards conclusion. As tensions in Europe intensified in 1939, they were also felt in Yugoslavia. When the new cabinet took power that same year, the war had already begun in Europe. The government sought to maintain neutrality primarily by trying to appease the Axis powers, as the country bordered Italy and the Third Reich and feared the direct attack. Therefore, changes were made to the editorial staff of Radio Belgrade. Vuk Dragović and Vučković were fired, and Stanislav Krakov, a more suitable candidate, became the chief music editor. The radio played an essential role in the events of March 1941, when Yugoslavia succumbed to German pressure and signed the Tripartite Pact. 2 days later, the army staged a coup and overthrew the government, declaring the underage King Peter II of age. Based on the review of newspaper archives, Radio Belgrade continued the regular broadcasting of music programs for the next 9 days. However, all of this came to an end on April the 6th. The Axis powers invaded Yugoslavia that day, and the city of Belgrade was heavily bombed. The building that housed Radio Belgrade studio was also heavily damaged, which led to the destruction of the part of the phonographic database. A few days into Nazi occupation, the shortwave radio station started broadcasting under the control of the Wehrmacht from the occupied Belgrade. It was known as Soldatensender Belgrade. This station is remembered, among other things, for promoting Schlager music and the biggest hit of the World War II, Lili Marlene. To conclude, today, when the Kingdom of Yugoslavia is a relic of history, almost a whole century old, the pre-war Radio Belgrade has also experienced a similar fate, and the general public knows very little about it, particularly about the popular music it broadcasted. Thank you very much for your attention.